Ave Maris Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix Celi porta.
Welcome to East2West Theology. I'm Dennis G.
And I'm Kyle Dean.
Happy 2023, and we thank you for joining us once again this year. And again, we just want to thank you for all those who have watched our videos and commented. We really appreciate that, and we encourage more of that as well. And hopefully you're praying for us as we're also praying for you. And before we begin in the prayer, we'll just
This is 2023. Zdrowie.
salute.
And cheers to you all as well. So let us open in prayer now, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. For this prayer, I want to open up with the words of St. Francis of Assisi in his Regula Non Bullata, his rule of life for all those that he impacted throughout his ministry as a great saint, and by virtue of that, theologian. And I beseech God that he bless all teaching, learning, possessing, recalling, and doing these words, as often as they repeat and do what there are written for the salvation of our soul. And I beg all, with a kiss of their feet, that they much love, keep, and deposit them anew. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, who liveth and reigneth in the unity of the Holy Ghost, God, world without end. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Kyle.
Absolutely. And we open with this prayer because as we kick off a new year and we express incredible gratitude for this incredibly successful launch that we've had, opening with this prayer series, because prayer is the heart of growth in the spiritual life and ultimately to become saints. We're reflecting on everything that's taken place in these past couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. Of course, we've had part 1 come out, part 2 has come out, and this part 3 will conclude the prayer series for now, although there's always an infinitude of things to cover. And
Indeed.
In that time, maybe we can just get into some current events and, specifically the kind of support that we have had. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've had a few hundred views just within not even a week,
right,
which was wildly beyond our expectations ever.
Oh, yes, for sure.
So
that's a large amount of views. I mean, for just getting kicked off and not really intending to have tens of thousands or millions of views. That few hundred is a good deal. So we thank you all for tuning in.
Absolutely, we're both teachers, current and former, and I don't think we've ever had a classroom filled with 300 people before. So.
No, I never did. Yeah.
It's truly a blessing, but it's...
And to any students watching, for either one of us, we thank you for joining us, and we continue to.
Absolutely, and realistically, that was always our hope going into this, is that this movement begins predominantly in our local region, which is the Western New York, Buffalo area.
Yes.
We've certainly been in the news a lot lately in terms of the cyclone blizzard, and we've made national news because of of course, sports are looking pretty okay right now too.
Yeah.
We're coming fresh off of a playoff
Playoff
victory.
win, wild card against the Dolphins.
Football, in the football world.
Squish the fish.
Indeed. So as Buffalonians, we are representing this area.
Indeed, yes.
And that's really all that we could hope for in terms of making an impact. The principle of subsidiarity being what it is, we ought to plant, where we are, to grow where we're rooted.
Yes.
And God will water those seeds. So maybe we can talk about the specific support that we've received and then get into some prayer.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to get into the theme of this show, which is different than the rest. Is that this is the Christmas theme, because it is the Christmas season still, even though we are in 2023, far beyond the New Year Day. We have the traditional Christmas season, which begins, of course, December 25th on the Gregorian calendar, and January 7th on the Julian calendar. And we move on for 40 days because of that symbolic number 40, right, that we see throughout Scripture, right? Noah's Ark, we see with Jesus in the desert, Moses, the wanderings. So 40 is a very significant number, indicating something significant is about to begin. After obviously something significant happened, which is 40 days. And so we have this anticipation from Advent to the coming of Christ, the incarnation, which is one of the greatest mysteries of our faith, right? The incarnation of Jesus Christ, the God-man. And so we, want to keep that traditional season ongoing, and not just for the 8-day octave from the 25th to January 1st, but also again, starting January 7th for the Julian calendar in the Eastern region of the world, but also for the remaining time that we have, again, that 40 days, which leads to February 2nd, the purification of our Lord in the temple, right, when he's circumcised, and the prophecy from Simeon is given to the Blessed Mother, right, about the sword piercing her heart. Thank you, God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the presentation. So that's why we have this Christmas theme, because it is the Christmas season, both East and West. Whichever calendar you're using, we're in that season right now.
100%.
So, indubitably.
Yeah, and obviously we started this, the actual formal launch of this channel on January 1st, which is the solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, a great holy day of obligation and
in the West, yeah.
In the West, that's right. And also episode 2 came out on what I know some call Old Christmas Day, which you just alluded to, which is Christmas Day in the Julian calendar in the East, January 7th.
Indeed.
So that was episode 2.
Yes.
Obviously, not coincidentally.
Right.
And so I guess the last thing to get into, we've covered the tree in the room, the proverbial elephant in the room, the fact that we ought to celebrate really until February 2nd. A tradition in our family, specifically small t,
right,
is certainly not synced up with the secular radio stations. We avoid Christmas music until Christmas Day and then beyond into the season. Whereas a lot of people kind of start Black Friday maybe, right? And
right,
which is actually inappropriate liturgically.
of course, yeah, it's Advent.
Right, Advent means anticipation.
Or Philip's fast in the East.
Okay,
which begins actually earlier than Advent in the West.
Beautiful, and
St. Andrew's Feast.
and so it's just a pious way to stay connected to the original rhythm of Christianity and the calendar. For us, we happen to, and I haven't read this anywhere, so if anyone has any other interesting small t traditions or ideas or ways to even improve on this, or maybe a formal way that's done, but we like to put up our ornaments Christmas Eve or Christmas Day.
Nice.
To indicate the festivity aspect of it. Usually we get our tree during Advent, maybe even the first Sunday of Advent. But bare, because it's bare, there's a hope, there's an anticipation. And then ultimately we keep it until February 2nd. And also, if anybody gets a live tree, and, well, live in the sense that it's real, but it's maybe cut off, you can catch some of the neighbors' trees that they throw out. You can use it as firewood if you can have a bonfire in your backyard. They smell incredible. There's just so many ways to take advantage of.
Real.
People do things in different ways, but there's an ancient way to do it, or a way to stay grounded in this season.
Right. And I think that, there's many different ways, again, small t tradition, but I think in Ukraine they have they put up the tree and the lights and things like that the week before as an anticipation.
Makes sense.
For Christ. I like the idea of like putting up the tree, putting up the lights, but waiting until Christmas Day to turn it all on.
Yes. Oh, see, we put the lights on and we put them on early. I guess we're getting too much delight. But what about like a Gaudete Sunday?
Yeah.
Plug on.
So again, there's so many different ways to go about it, and another thing I've heard too is okay, because we're in the world, we have to live in the world. Well, listen to the secular Christmas music leading up to Christmas, sure, because it's secular and it's just about Santa and reindeers and things, which is festive, and it's usually snowing in our part of the globe. But then the religious music put that on Christmas Day and onward, right? Until February 2nd.
We found some incredible Advent chants.
Oh, Advent chants as well.
Yeah, that you can listen to throughout Advent.
And I've done that myself, to be honest.
Yeah, and then you can rely on radio for Christmas Day and maybe the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, of course, with the gift of the internet,
Right.
You have plenty, 40 days to get into all that stuff that was unfortunately teased far too early.
Right. And it seems the secular world tends to like invert everything, such as Christmas, such as even Santa, even St. Nicholas, right? So, but Fridays usually are the day of penance, right, in both East and West. And Sunday is the day to celebrate. So you have penance first, and then you lead up to the celebration, whereas in the secular society, Friday is the day to celebrate, and then Sunday is this day to prepare for work the next day, which is totally inverted.
Right.
And that's like a penitential day then, Sunday, right, where you're like, you have to think about work and do all these things, which is absurd, right? You shouldn't even think about work as much as possible on Sunday. You want to really absorb that day. So anyway,
absolutely,
that's the Lord's Day. But there's so many other current events that we can get into, such as Pope Benedict XVI's passing, former emeritus, right? Because now he's passed. We no longer have to use that title anymore. Just like any other pope that has passed, we don't use the title emeritus.
Right.
But may God rest his soul. Big fan of Pope Benedict XVI. And he was big on the Eastern Church and getting into the fathers more, the Eastern fathers. And I know a lot of Catholics and a lot of Eastern Catholics and Orthodox, I think, appreciated Pope Benedict XVI for really delving into the Eastern fathers more than some of the others, such as Gregory of Nyssa, obviously St. John Chrysostom, etc. I mean, he quoted several different fathers of the East, and probably St. John Damascene, etc. I mean, again, he was big into the Eastern fathers and the Western. He really wanted to bring the two together. And that kind of began with, well, we can argue that, but I think in our modern age, Pope St. John Paul II, he really wanted to reunite the East and West. And not many people know this, but he's half Ukrainian. His mother was Ukrainian, but died when he was just a baby.
Who's this?
Pope St. John Paul II.
Got it.
So he's half Polish, half Ukrainian, but almost no one knows that. And so his father remarried a Polish woman, so that's why, But anyway, the point of the matter is Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and even Pope Francis has been, trying to lead the charge and bringing back the East and calling the synod, the third synod or Council of Nicaea at some point in the near future, 2024 possibly. But
well, I can tell you that when it comes to Pope Benedict XVI, my wife and I went to Rome, and some years ago, and we went down into the crypt area under St. Peter's, where where some are buried, and I remember our tour guide made very clear that it's Benedict's wish to be buried next to John Paul II.
Really? Wow.
And they showed the area where he's anticipated to be buried, and I remember the tour guide saying, "By a show of hands, who loves Benedict?" And we shut our hands up immediately. And, he was
still alive, obviously. So
of course, and he was emeritus at the time.
Yes.
And it was just such a special moment to just appreciate everything that he's done, and to anticipate him being able to rest in peace.
Right.
And
I mean, just his Jesus of Nazareth series as well. I mean, just getting into that, it just sparked my thought, because I'm reading the book right now, the infancy narratives that he wrote, which was his last of his Jesus of Nazareth series, which is ironic because it's the beginning of the gospel, but he wrote it last. Which I think he wrote the section on his public ministry first, I believe, and then his passion narrative, and then the infancy narrative. So it is a bit juggled, but I do appreciate those books, and it's a very small book, the infancy narrative. So I do recommend that one. And again, I just love his scientific mindset, not only from the theological section, but also the scientific perspective, as well, and the astronomical. He just likes to get a full range of view on theology, on God, because God is really the author of everything. So whatever topic we're looking at, whether it be astronomy, theology, philosophy, history, it's all based on God, right? And so it should be centered around God, because he is the center of everything, right? And he is the creator of all. So I like his perspective on that.
That's why the science of calendarology actually requires that a tree be present until February 2nd. Should one state in life be able to afford one, of course. I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah. I think
it was probably a blog.
Maybe in an appendix somewhere, but
yeah, no doubt.
So,
well, as you're talking here, I
Webster's
noticed
dictionary.
It could be,
or Oxford. Who knows?
In the spirit
a funny thing though.
Oh, sure.
I noticed, because I have both Oxford and Webster's. When I'm reading a book, I utilize them if I don't know a word. And it's interesting that the Oxford will give you a different pronunciation than the Webster's, because Webster's is American based, while Oxford is English based, and their pronunciation of words is going to vary. And so I've noticed the same word I've looked up sometimes. I'll look up in both, because they have different definitions sometimes in those different dictionaries.
And in this day and age, definitions change all the time.
Yeah, so it's good to have. But what's your favorite dictionary, by the way?
It's a great question.
Probably the Catholic Bible Dictionary.
I mean, of course, that's up there. I have some scholastic dictionaries.
Yeah.
Scholastic principle dictionaries. Dictionaries on philosophic principles.
Right.
That I very much enjoy. But I noticed you have, it looks like a new sacramental as well. Speaking of current events.
Oh, not the Chaki, right?
Yeah.
But we've
got those.
The wedding ring.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. I don't recall that being in the other two videos.
I'm a married man now, thanks be to God. Yes, I was not married in the previous two videos, and now I am.
Dennis has joined the ranks, and unlike me, though, you are able to become a priest someday as well.
Yes, something we can get into. Catholic. Yes, for those that don't know, in the Eastern perspective on things,
as well as discipline.
Discipline, right? So again, we haven't touched on this yet in our videos, and I'm not going to get into it at length now, but there is a level of theological teaching. And so the first being dogma, right? Second being a doctrine in the sense of church teaching, but it's not dogmatically defined as being de fide, meaning of the faith, something that you must believe to be Catholic. So there's different levels there, and then there's another level, third level, which is that of discipline. And so that is more of, how would you explain discipline besides external actions that are trying to formulate the internal reality that's going on? Well, just briefly for the
in terms of our moral responsibility to it, it demands what's called obiscum religiosum, or religious submission of intellect and will.
Correct. Well, which would be second level at least.
Okay.
The third would be.
So even with doctrines, you're saying?
Even with doctrines, I mean, you do have to honor them.
Sure.
Yes.
I know actually Benedict, Ratzinger at the time's Donum Veritatis in 1990, it talks about the role of a theologian, and we'll certainly be dedicating video to that when we speak more about what it is that we're truly actually aiming for here, and we can get into that. But I'll actually to hazard to veer differently, I just want to say congratulations on your marriage.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There will be some Easter eggs for anybody that wants to pay attention as we release future videos. Dennis may or may not have it on his hand, because as God works outside of time, so do our publishings.
That's our content.
Yes,
right?
Indeed.
Could be in 2023, could be in 2030.
Another time. So
in 2020.
in any
we
event,
won't reveal yet.
Hindsight is 2020. So yeah, I think that covers a lot of what's going on currently, and just in closing, as it pertains to our appreciation, we've had numerous priests and deacons reach out to us. I happen to be here in the Buffalo Diocese representing the West. I'm so blessed to have the approbation of our bishop to teach and to engage in ministry, and was even told a specific book to read on prayer that has had some impact on what we've shared here. It's called The Divine Fire Within by Thomas Dubai. It's a great contemporary read. I would liken it to, if someone likes St. Louis de Montfort's True Devotion to Mary, or if they like Father Michael Gately's 33 Days to Morning Grace.
Morning Glory.
Morning Glory, excuse me. Yeah, because he also has 33 on Divine Mercy. You know, Thomas Dubai has a very powerful gift in being able to contemporize the language of timeless truths. So it's almost like the Father Michael Gately of touching on the 9 levels of prayer and just prayer in general from a Western perspective, Teresian, to Teresa of Avila herself, right? Interior Castles and Her Other Works. So that was very, very helpful, and I thank you, Your Excellency, for that recommendation. And also to all the priests and deacons for their support. I mean, I'm on a you know, direct contact basis with almost half of the active priests in our region.
Wow.
And
in the West.
In the West, it was absolutely.
Yeah, Diocese of Buffalo.
That's right. And my understanding from the East is that especially one's local priest is extraordinarily important in terms of having the support, because you know your bishop may not even be in the area.
No, my bishop is hundreds of miles away because he oversees, which that's what bishop means really.
Overseer, right?
Oversee the region. Just because of the sheer lack of numbers, you know, of Eastern Catholics, in particular the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. We don't have that many, so
you're spread throughout the world.
Yeah, the bishop can oversee an entire region, meaning like multiple states, such as that bishop would oversee New York and New England. Some bishops oversee the entire West Coast, right, etc. I mean, it's just, it can become very massive because the number of parishioners within his eparchy, which is Greek for diocese. Diocese is Latin for territory, eparchy is Greek for territory. So in his eparchy or territory, they probably have the same amount of parishioners as a Diocese of Buffalo does, right, throughout multiple states. And that's why the bishop's so far away. So that's it. And again, just to confirm, just going back to what we were discussing very briefly, because I don't think I even touched on it before you. You're kind of discussing on discipline. I just want to throw it out there because it's kind of like it was a ball thrown that wasn't hit yet. But
Sure.
For the baseball fans out there, that we in the East again have married priests because of our discipline. The level 3 is different from that of the West, though it was the same at one point in the early church for at least the first several hundred years. But our discipline is that married men can become deacons, and that married deacons can become married priests. But priests, once you're a deacon or a priest, you can never marry if you're not already, and if your spouse dies, you cannot remarry. So that's the discipline. Again, it's a level 3, so that can change, that can alter. It's not of dogma, or it's not of religious submission of intellect and will of the same caliber as level 2 of magisterial teachings. Yeah,
So he needs to focus on having children and you know, ordering the household well and all of the things that are called for in the scriptures.
And you can see that in 1 Timothy actually chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3 talks about how you need to be, a man needs to be ordered first in his own household before he becomes a bishop, because there was married bishops in the early church. St. Hilary Poitiers was a Western bishop that was married, let alone the Eastern ones. So,
and even to just start as a deacon, Acts 6 verses 1 through 6.
Right. So again,
following.
This is very scriptural, but we're not here to discuss that right now. We're actually here to discuss prayer.
Indeed.
So maybe we can jump into a prayer, and you know, just what we left off last time. I wanted to get into the Eastern perspective a little bit more on the 3 modes of prayer. Right, and also the 3 stages of prayer. But you know what? I'll let you go through the 3 modes of prayer first, since we have our offices sitting right here.
Sure, absolutely. So, in the church, this is actually, you know, we made a joke in our first episode towards the end about a lesser known prayer called the Rosary. That was obviously for any faithful Catholics.
Right.
You know, the Rosary is something that the Blessed Mother calls us to pray daily. All of us. So,
which we have right here, I believe, or is that a chaplet?
No, this is Chaplet of the
I
Blue
see.
Face.
Okay, well that's a whole other story.
Sure. And
Beautiful.
but the reason that I also mentioned, rosaries are very important, but they're actually the lowest of the three modes of prayer that we're all called to. At least a personal rosary, a private rosary.
That you say it on your own. Right?
Because the first level is private prayer, and that's the lowest of the three modes. It's very efficacious. It's very important. It's important for us to live out our faith throughout all the moments of our days of our lives.
Right.
Right. Again, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing.
Correct. Yes.
Rosaries, I've heard them called the sacramental of sacramentals, whereas of course the Eucharist is the sacrament of sacraments. So it is on the level of the first mode of private prayer. It is certainly the highest, and many would say. And in general, tapping into vocal prayer level 1, as we've covered, and then mental prayer level 2, which the Rosary does both, is the way to engage the higher levels, right? Level 2 is the gateway to the upper 7 levels, as we've said. But then there's mode 2, and mode 2 is
Prayer in common.
prayer in common.
Which is what we did at the beginning of this episode.
That's right. Where two or more are gathered, so too am I with them, our Lord said, and Master. And when we opened the prayer of this series, right, I specifically opened up with St. Francis of Assisi's words because there's so much wisdom packed in that one soul's life. He was, according to multiple Franciscans that I've spoken to, a layman his entire life. There's a debate within the order that perhaps he became a deacon, perhaps because there's no existing document that I've heard of, or that these, that Franciscans have seen, that Francis went through tonsure and the stages to become a deacon formally, as was the standard in the church at the time. And yet, as a layman, he was commanding people throughout his life. He wrote a regula by which people live by. And the prayer that we prayed was that his prayer, that you would love when the gospel is preached, which you can of course do in the form of a like with this video, that you would keep it, because that's of course all of our responsibility to be receptive to and also to participate in the Great Commission. In order to keep it, one would subscribe in modern parlance, and then of course to deposit it, right, to spread it, which is what for the purposes of this effort would be sharing. Now, we're not going to become people that just kind of say, all right, at the beginning of every video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share.
No, we're not like that.
We're not those people. Obviously, there are a plenty outside of, but even within the Catholic world, and that's not our intention with this effort. Of course, more on that when we cut the video on what we're here to do. But the prayer is to strengthen you for your mission, right? And with the prayer in common, that efficacy is strengthened, it's increased. And in fact, St. Louis de Montfort talks about in The Secret of Mary that the secret of a rosary prayed in common versus at the first mode, which is private personal, but now it's private and common. When you get a group of people to pray a rosary together, you're getting the amount of grace and the economy of grace as the amount of rosaries prayed by the number of people present multiplied by the holiest person present. So if you had the good Padre Pio on your side in the rosary circle,
you'd have socks there.
you'd be in a great spot. So,
right.
But of course, the whole purpose of us opening with a prayer series is to fortify saints in training so that we can become those holy people that are contributing to these efforts.
Correct.
And so with private common prayer, it's very, very important. It's more efficacious than level 1. But then you shift to where the real grace floods. The floodgates open. And level 3, the highest...
Mode 3.
Mode 3 in this hierarchy is public common prayer, public prayer.
Which would be the office.
The office.
Or the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which is one and the same in some sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And if you want to take it, obviously,
Yes.
the holy sacrifice of the Mass, or as it's called in the East, the Divine Liturgy,
Correct. The divine liturgy.
is part 1 of 2 of liturgy,
Right.
whereas a breviary or an office of the laity, a divine office of some sort, is part 2 of the liturgy.
Right, so just to rock these, Little Office of Blessed Virgin Mary. So again, just to rehash, mode 1. So we're not talking about the stages of prayer, not to confuse anybody. There's 9 levels or stages of prayer
In the
that
West.
we see in the West, 3 in the East, which I'll touch on in a little while. But we're talking about the modes of prayer. So that means how are we praying and what kind of prayer is being said. And so what we have then is, again, just to rehash what Kyle said, we have prayer, private prayer level, mode 1, which is when you're just praying in your room alone, as Jesus talks about, close your door and pray alone.
Private personal.
That's the private person. Then we have prayer in common, meaning when you pray with your brothers and sisters, as Jesus says, 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'll be there. But now we have liturgical prayer, or again, public prayer. And that is the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the Divine Liturgy, which is heavenly, right? Meaning that God is the one really actualizing that prayer, and it's happening in heaven. And the office is an extension of the holy sacrifice of the Mass, or the Divine Liturgy. And so when we say this office, the entire church around the world is praying it in common, really, but it is a public prayer because it is the liturgical or heavenly worship that's happening, right? We're entering into it in real time in our lives, in our world. And I think you gave a great example or analogy of how it's like a train moving. It's like either you get on that train or you don't, you miss it. There's different hours that you hit. And these are the modes of prayer that we're discussing here now. And so if you want to touch more on that, jumping on that train for mode 3 with public prayer, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So because you're shifting from private personal prayer to private common prayer to public prayer in the highest mode, you are basically plugging into that powerhouse of grace that's available in the universal church. Now, of course, there's different offices that can be prayed, so the actual prayers themselves may differ or vary. That's obviously, as a result of that, you would conclude that's not where the efficacy comes from in terms of a great increase from even daily rosaries. Where it comes from is the fact that, as Dennis had touched on, the entire church is praying at set hours. So even though there's 24 time zones throughout the entire planet, and this is, it's happening in succession throughout the world, there's a synchronicity there. You mentioned astronomy earlier. Of course, with the Earth and the Sun rotating in our solar system,
right?
Every single celestial body is teaching us something, right? The 8 minutes and 40 seconds that it takes for the ray of the sun to hit the Earth, the 300,000 meters per second that it takes for light to travel, all of these things that are taking place have profound mysteries within them that the realm of theology can begin to unpack in different ways, right? Maybe we'll get into a video on the 9 known choirs of angels, and of course how the middle choir, dominations, virtues, and powers, are involved in the movements of those celestial bodies that we see, right? So there's an angelic component to all of those other lower sciences. And so too, when we pray this prayer, in whatever form we're doing it, we're syncing up by virtue of the timing of it. And the fact that it is called for, it's been proclaimed forth from the very beginning, and it comes from God as its source, as you had mentioned. So St. Alphonsus de Liguori says that praying divine office is worth 100 rosaries a day. That's 100 rosaries a day.
That's St. Alphonsus de Liguori, right?
100%. So, and this is something that we've noticed in our own personal locuses of loci of control, of influence, right? Principle of subsidiarity, again, being so crucial in one's home community. You'll get ministry efforts that are for those around our age group that, it might take a lot of evangelization just to convince people to get on the daily rosary. But realistically speaking, as we've touched on in a previous video as well, St. Louis de Montfort in Secrets of the Rosary says 5 decades a day is for children, but 15 decades a day historically is a standard rosary. Now, of course, that's really, I guess you could call that on the level of discipline, because of course now there's the luminous mysteries that are introduced, and there's all kinds of other mysteries.
And people are in the contemporary age, so people are living much differently than they did back in the day, or you're living in a village or a countryside.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot more going on, so to fit in more rosaries could be difficult for more people now than it was back in the day, but still there is this element of wanting to push yourself to do more.
And the spirit in which that needs to take place is similar to the levels of prayer that we've been covering, and now we're adding a symphonic layer with the modalities that are involved. Love needs to be a driver, love, charity. Charity is love of God and love of neighbor for the sake of God. You can't be falling into the traps of scruples or presumption or despair or anything that's out of balance of the hope that you'll be able to progress in your prayer life in whatever way that God calls you to. And far be it from us, again, you don't ever have to tune into anything that we ever put out there to gain the gospel. But God has obviously, endowed us, breathed into us. We are God-breathed.
Through baptism and confirmation.
And therefore commissioned, especially with the added layer of having the excellence of theologian and being commissioned by our local clergy to do our part for our region at the very least. So that's what makes this, different than just some, a commentary, blog or something like that.
We're not trying to be like anyone else on YouTube. We're our own distinct personalities, right? And so we want to exude that. And
I'm not interested in keeping tabs on how many decades a day people are praying. The point is that decades make rosaries, and there are so many different prayer devotions that you can tap into in order to ultimately just
which I wanted to get on.
Glean the grace.
Yeah, which I wanted to get on the some of the stages of prayer in the East. So since we covered the modes of prayer, which is again private, right, personal prayer, prayer in common, and then public prayer. Within private prayer, and I believe we can touch more on this maybe later in the episode, but how the levels of prayer look within each mode, right? But let's just focus on private, right? The private prayer, as you should be doing daily, right? Private prayer. Well, your private prayer, and I say this again from the great mystics and doctors and church fathers, I'm not saying that you should do it from my own authority, speaking from the authority of Christ, who says pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians chapters 1 through 5 talk all about prayer. Pray without ceasing, right? It's Romans 15:15, I believe it says, again, pray, again, without ceasing, but in its own way. It says, do not stop praying. Then there's, praying for one another, offering supplications, and praying on behalf of other people throughout your day. So there's many different reasons to pray, and again, you're acting as a vessel of grace. You're acting like, see God as the sun, and the sun's hitting the earth. Well, you remember when you're a child, you take a magnifying glass and you put it over an ant to try to burn it. Well, I did once, even though I don't like to kill ants or anything. I don't like to kill anything really, but
ants are one of the only animals that Francis had a vendetta against.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
fun little aside.
Yeah, sure. You like to step on them?
I don't know that. I just know that he thought it was not virtuous the way that they engaged in community.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, just kind of anthropomorphizing them. But anyways.
That's funny. But very robotic, I suppose. They are, the ants. So, getting back to it, we're like the magnifying glass you put over, over an ant, but by grace, hopefully, over somebody else, that we're giving grace to them, not to harm them, but to help them. So that's why we want to pray for others. We want to pray without ceasing, as the scriptures tell us, right? Thessalonians. And we want to, in Romans and Jesus and, the Gospels, ultimately the Word of God is teaching us to pray. But also it discusses how we are to, we see with John or Paul, as I think many people say Paul, he entered the third heaven, right? So there's this idea of entering deeper into, right, the mysteries of Christ, into God, right? And we can all say that we've had times where we prayed maybe on a deeper level than other times, right? Well, in the East, we see at least 3 levels of prayer, right? And
should we call them stages?
Or stages.
To distinguish?
Sure. 3 stages of prayer in the East. Theophan the Recluse, right? And the Orthodox recognize him as Saint Theophan the Recluse, which I believe was in the 18th century.
Yeah, that's right.
He had a lot to say about prayer, right? He was a recluse, after all. And so he talks about the prayer of the lips, right? When you're just praying to God, whether you're saying the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Jesus prayer, etc., your own private, personal prayer. You're praying with your lips, right? You're speaking. But there's more to it, right? Do you want to just speak with your mouth and that's it? I mean, you can call somebody and talk to them, but then you just hang up the phone. Did you really have a conversation with them? Did you really grow in communion with them or a relationship with them? Like, imagine just like calling somebody and just telling them all about your day. And there are people like that we know, that I personally know. And I think everyone has those people in their lives. And if you're one of them, maybe you can get some food from this. It's not good to do that, right? It's not good just to talk like you're giving a lecture, and then just hang up. Well, that's praying with your lips, right? That's the lowest level of prayer.
Lip service.
Lip service, as Jesus says as well, right? He says that he does not want those who give him lip service. In the Old Testament as well, right? We see time and time again, God speaks in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament, about those who pray with their lips, but not with their heart. So let's move on then. So how can we do this? We pray with our lips. Well, then we move on to praying with our mind, actually. We're actually thinking about what we're saying, Theophan the Recluse says, right? We start to think about the words we're saying. Whether we're praying on our own or using a prayer book, right? Looking at the words, we want to make the words our own, he says, right? And that would be stage 2, praying with your mind. You're making those words your own. You're not just speaking, you're not just speaking vain repetition or vain words, but then you're thinking about it and you actually consciously understand what you're saying. And then you pray from there, you go from the head to the heart, right? The noetic prayers we've discussed in previous episodes. And you begin to discuss to God what's going on in the innermost beings of your heart, and you're then listening to what he has to say to you in the process, right? So not only are you speaking deeply, like you're having a very emotional phone call with a deep friend or a very moving conversation with somebody, but that you're ultimately listening to what they have to say. And it's all a deep communion, right, that you're having with the other person. And I'm sure spouses would have that as well, right? And that's a good analogy, because we are ultimately to be the bride of Christ. And that's the key of theology of the body. If you want to talk about theology of the body, is we're called to be the bride of Christ, right? We are the bride of Christ if you're baptized, right? Confirmed, receive Holy Communion. Ultimately, you enter fully into that being bride of Christ, and we will see that revealed in heaven.
I think he's going to do a good job as a married man. That's a good sign.
Sure, yes. See, that should be an image, right? Marriage is supposed to be an image of us being espoused to Christ. And so those are the 3 stages of prayer in the East, that I've discovered, and how that will make you a saint, that will make you holy, and that's the goal of life, is to become holy, to become a great Christian, right? That what makes you a great Christian is not doing like works of charity out in the public, like feeding the poor. Those things are necessary, but it's ultimately having a communion or a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, but in the church, right, as communion. And that's what brings up having these modes of prayer as well, right? Not just with yourself, with another, and then with the whole church. And so, did you want to touch on something before I move on?
Absolutely. So, obviously, in the liturgy, at least in the West, you can fill me in more in the East, you see this in the way that we express ourselves. You know, I wanna take this moment to squash, you know, two challenges that we may receive from either non-believers or people that do not share our faith tradition. Right? One is, you know, what's with all of those movements or motions or
gestures?
These gestures that you're making in Mass. Well, the fact of the matter is that there is an origin to every single one of them, and there's a deep theological rich meaning. Obviously, every single time the priest is about to open the Gospel, which are the words of our Lord Himself and the life of our Lord Himself, you know, we make this sign, right, which covers, you know, that we will love and serve God in our mind, our lips, and our heart, right? And all that we think, and all that we say, and in all that we do. Right, and all that we do. And that's interesting, right? Because you heard me make the connection before, or even in this scholasticism, the heart, you know, really it's like level 3, affective prayer, which is really, you know, like if your heart's in it, I said, it really pertains to the will, which is a soul faculty. So it's you know, what you think, what you say, and what you do all need to be synced up in order to be living an authentic life. Because otherwise, you know, if you're saying something that's off, you're lying. If you're thinking something that's off, or doing something not in accordance with what you're really thinking, that's you know, a form of lie and what's called the sin of simulation. Right? You're simulating something that's other than
what is reality,
or what you truly believe. And those will always get you in the long run, if not the short run. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I want to say too is we're not paying lip service when we pray things like the Rosary, or even the Jesus Prayer, which we can perhaps touch into next. There's a chasm of a difference between the vain repetitions that are warned about in the New Testament, which actually, if you actually study it in context, was referring to specific pagan practices at the time, where, and ultimately the universal notion is that the end is what matters, right? The end of what you're praying about or what you're invoking is where you're going to ride or die, because if it's in accordance with the true God and right religion and right faith, then there's no vanity in praying 10 Hail Marys in a row, because you have to remember that's only the vocal prayer portion of it. That's only level 1, but you're also supposed to be engaging level 2. If you're actually only rattling off the prayers, or with the Jesus Prayer, just doing each of those over and over again, but without engaging into the meditation, if you're not in the context of the schematic you just laid out, if you're not going from the prayer of the lip to the prayer of the mind, then, well, it wouldn't still be considered vain as long as the prayer is objectively good in and of itself, but it won't be nearly as efficacious.
Correct. Yeah.
In the context of the Rosary, it would be considered praying not a Rosary, but what's called a Marian Psalter. Right. Which is a different thing than praying the Rosary. The Rosary requires the mental prayer component to be active. Right. And if you're praying, you know, if you're invoking something that's not in accordance with God's will, then that's vain at best. So there's a serious distinction to be made there about what's the correct interpretation of that scripture verse.
Right. Yeah, and I thank you for bringing that up, because it's very important that people realize that you need to engage in mental prayer, and we've mentioned this before, because you have no relationship with Christ then. How can you? If you're just speaking lip service, it's like praying, and then as you're praying, but you're like playing a video game at the same time. It's okay. That's fine. I'm glad that you're praying, you know, but it's like, are you really having a relationship with somebody if you're like talking to them as you're playing a game? It's not really deep enough to where it's like Christ calls us to have a deep relationship with him. And he mentions that, and here's a key point. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. And he also says that, you know, those who, you know, actually seek, right, with their heart, to dine, right, with the Lord, he will dine with the Lord, right? That Christ will
essentially commune.
commune, right? And that's the Eucharistic dining, really, that he's referring to, as we know as Catholics and Orthodox. That there is this Eucharistic dining, which is, again, the highest mode of prayer, right? And what we want to do here, even at Mass, so, and this is where the different levels or stages intertwine with the different modes of prayer, is whether you're doing private prayer in common or public prayer, you want to enter deeply into it. And now, whether you're saying prayers that you've come up on your own, or that you're using a book, or you're using other saints' prayers, that's fine. You just need to make them your own, right? And you need to work at that. And just like, working out or exercising with your body, you need to exercise your soul. People somehow think that, oh, I can do all this work with my body, but my soul, okay, Christ just takes care of everything. I don't have to do anything. That's false, right? James, the book of James, the epistle of James, talks all about how we have to strive, and we must work out our salvation with fear and trembling. So we obviously must work out our salvation. Ultimately, it's by God's grace that we're saved. In the Council of Orange, we see that as well. The Church teaches, in I believe 529 AD, right, 6th century, that grace is ultimately what it's all about. But grace gives us the ability to work, and that's what people don't realize, that it's utilizing that grace to do something, right, or to enter into deep prayer. And so just to move on to the Jesus prayer, which is huge on the East, and I've mentioned it in previous videos. But maybe to get a little bit more deeply into it, again, vocally, we're saying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And there's different variations too. You can include Mary. You can include the living God. You can just say, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy. Right? There's so many different ways to say it, but it's from Scripture, the Gospel of Luke, etc., where you have the man crying out to Christ, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of David, have pity on my servant, or have pity on me. And so the church has used what we see in John, calling Christ the Son of God, not just the Son of David, but the Son of God, and using that and coupling the two scripture passages together as Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And again, that's added as well. There's different variations to it, but it's ultimately the same essence of what you're praying. And that's the vocal, and you want to repeat it over and over again, right? And it could be 100 times, could be 50 times, could be 3 times, could be 1 time, could be 300 times. It could be all day, right? The point is that you're praying without ceasing, as 1 Thessalonians, again, 1 through 5 mentions over and over again, Romans, that you're praying without ceasing. And the point of that is that you want to constantly be in communion with God. Again, you want to be plugged in, right, to the divine grace. So you unplug yourself, right, like you unplug your phone, unplug your laptop, whatever you're using. Your battery starts to drain. Our soul starts to drain when we don't plug into God. That's the analogy I'm using here, is that when you're praying, you're plugged in, right? You're plugged in. And so the Jesus prayer allows you to enter into a meditative state, because you're saying the same thing over and over again. So you're allowing yourself to then get into the mental state of being where you can focus on those words and make those words your own, right, as Theophany Recluse says. And then the goal is to bring it into your heart, to where some people begin to weep because they realize, wow, I'm nothing without Christ, right? I am nothing without God, right? I wouldn't exist without him. I wouldn't continue existing without him, and I won't exist in the future without him, right? And so the tassels here are used to wipe your tears when you begin to enter into that stage 3 or level 3, stage 3 of prayer. And that's the beauty of it, because then it becomes deep into your soul, into your being, and you're entering into a deep relationship with him. And so there's so much more to say on this, but there's so much more to also say as well. But I did want to bring one last thing before you begin to discuss levels 5 through 9, is that you're going to see that when I say the East, right, there's the Eastern Orthodox once again, and there's the Eastern Catholic Church, which came back in union. Of course, what Kyle is going to discuss with St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross is, of course, accepted by the Eastern Catholics. So there are 9 levels of prayer in the East, right? Because the East is Catholic. But just specifically originating from the East, there's seen as 3, but within those 3, you can always say that there are the different levels, or even just within the 3rd, I would say, maybe when you get to level 3, that could be seen as, divided into, levels 3 through 9, really. The different
stage 3.
Yeah, stage 3 can be seen as really the different components of the Teresian prayer. So hopefully that makes sense. Sure. We're going to unlock these distinctive levels from the Western perspective.
Yeah, and ultimately the takeaway there is these are not mutually exclusive concepts. At the end of the day, it's perhaps different language or different nomenclature to come to the same universal insights, because at the end of the day, the goal of all prayer is deep and abiding eternal communion with God.
Right.
And
deification.
Right, deification, the theosis in the East,
yes.
Right, they would say. And
Theo is God. Right.
And deification is commonly used more in the West.
Correct.
And these are terms of becoming consumed by God and becoming kind of absorbed and one with Him, but it does not mean that we are annihilated. Just to be very clear, because there are heretical notions out there of what it means to be, wrapped up in the one. Even in Buddhism, for example, they have ideas of samsara and nirvana and being annihilated to the point where you're part of nothingness.
And there may have been some small Eastern sects of Orthodoxy that in the early church that maybe Nestorianism possibly that thought that it's like we become like a drop in the ocean, right? We just dissipate into God. But that's not what Catholic theology is.
No. We
do enter into God deeply in that way, but we also keep our distinctive natures.
Absolutely, and there's another term that's called the apotheosis, which is a transformation into our Lord. But it really starts with different experiences. There's kind of the substance, and then there's the accidents of what can happen when you start engaging, when you start experiencing, I should say, mystical prayer. Like for example, the substance of it would be the deepening of union with God and the experiencing of His grace in your soul. Accidents would include things like having a theophany, or upon reaching level 8, some experience stigmatization. And by some, I mean, as of the early...
wounds of Christ.
Right, the wounds of Christ. As of the early 20th century, I read a tome recently where there's an expert. He was the foremost expert in the planet at the time, and there were 321 known cases
Wow.
from St. Francis of Assisi in 1224 to present then. So, you're looking on average very, 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 very small fraction of 1% of souls.
So not many people enter into that.
And those are accidents. They're and by
accidents of being in the higher levels, correct?
Correct. Of prayer.
And what you mean by accidents is?
Well, the substance is the essence. What's essentially taking place in order for it to even be able to categorically or ontologically be called what it is. Whatever level of prayer it is that we're referring to as it pertains to this topic. And then accidents would be things that may or may not happen, right? Like after effects, if you will. Just to keep it really short and sweet.
Right.
But so we're picking up on where we left off on the last 2 videos, and obviously, especially in part 2, I went at length more on levels 1 through 4, particularly finishing up on level 2 and then taking a bunch of time on level 3 and 4. I'm not going to do that with this video, and that's pedagogically, there's a pedagogical reason for that, and that's because it begins to become so nuanced as you get to these higher levels. And unfortunately, many are called but few are chosen. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast. So few souls take the time to reorient their ways of thinking, to prioritize this in their life, that really honing in on the specificity of what can happen in these higher realms is most prudent to hone in on for a specific soul, because there's a lot of advice that I could give that would not apply universally, and therefore it just may not be prudent to do so. So just in keeping with kind of rigidly with mostly St. Teresa of Avila as the framework here, just as a review, levels 5 through 9 are the prayer of mystical contemplation. That's level 5. Level 6 is the prayer of quiet. Level 7 is the prayer of union. Level 8 is the prayer of ecstatic union or conforming union, and then also known as spiritual betrothal. And then level 9 is the prayer of mystical marriage or transforming union. And
that's the goal of everyone.
Indeed. In fact, there's
that's a theological view I have.
With even what a lot of people don't know. I know that you get kind of like catchphrases and buzz phrases that come out of movements, and one of the things that came out in light of the Second Vatican Council is, especially for our age range, a lot of people are like, yeah, the universal call to holiness, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize in terms of the profundity of that expression, universal call to holiness, is that was actually a foregone conclusion of a centuries-long theological debate that is now settled, and there is no going back and forth on it anymore.
Where was that settled?
Which is with the Second Vatican Council.
Oh yes.
Which is it really largely began with St. Francis de Sales, who's considered the doctor of the laity. You know, he wrote, of course, the Introduction to the Devout Life.
Beautiful book.
And absolutely.
He writes to a married woman, right?
Yep, Philothea. But it's really by extension for all laity. And
right.
he was really a mover and a shaker, if you want to use that term, in his day, in the sense that kind of the rigidity or the clericalism, which is a common term that the Holy Father throws around now,
Pope Francis.
that is that gridlocks people into certain ways of thinking that are stuffy and don't allow for the Holy Spirit to breathe, would include they were wrapped up in debates about these levels of prayer. So obviously, particularly from the 1500s on, when St. Teresa of Avila gave us the 9 levels that we are now referencing by name, St. Francis de Sales was really in his kind of empowering the laity movement, ultimately becoming the doctor of the laity. He said, he made very clear as an early cheerleader of this, that all 9 levels of prayer are attainable by all souls.
Which is huge.
And there were a lot of, if you study the kind of the progression of prayer tomes throughout time, and you've got Scaramelli, you've got Lahodi in the 1800s, you've got Farges in the early 1900s, you know, all these really fascinating books that you can read to grow upon St. Teresa of Avila. And then, of course, in the East, you've got Gregory of Palamas, if you want to get into Hesychism.
Well, then we
triads.
also have the desert monks.
Oh, for sure.
And,
I'm just saying
the
for
Philokalia.
this. Yeah. Well, for this, was that 1500s to present?
No. That's prior.
Sure, that's what I'm focusing. Yeah, right. And it all connects, of course. There's a progression here.
Yeah, for sure.
But when it comes to the debate about the universal call to holiness, for the longest time, some of those prominent writers of the day would go back and forth and vacillate on whether the laity had access to these top 5 levels, and many said no.
Which is clericalism.
The distinction that was made by these erroneous teachings was that the first 4 levels are for the laity, and the top 5 levels are only for the clergy.
Which makes me think of a master's level course I took on Vatican II from I believe a great priest, Franciscan, that's now in California with the Carmelites, actually ministering to them. But anyway, the point of the matter is, he mentioned in class how there was this thought back around that era before Vatican II where Jesus talks about the 30, he talks about 30-fold. He talks about
the 100-fold.
Yeah, but is it 30,
70, 100 or something like that?
60, 100 or 70?
It might be 60.
Yeah, 30, 60, 100-fold. And there was this false view that, the laity is a 30-fold, right?
Yes.
And then the 60-fold
religious, like nuns or something. And
I think it was
clergy are 100.
I think it was the opposite. I think clergy is 60 and then religious 100. But either way, you get the idea, right? That the 100 was for like this special class, right?
Called us, yeah.
Vatican
set
II,
apart.
Vatican II squashed that. A married man, married woman, called the hundredfold, he said, in class, right? And that's what Vatican II is teaching us, that whether you're a priest, religious, you could be 30-fold, you can be 60, you can be 100, depends on your own personal fulfilling of your vocation that the Lord has called you to.
Sure, and when we get into our video on schism, heresy, and because of course, you know, one of the efforts of this channel is to bring as many into the fold as possible.
Right, of
We
course,
have-
that's the goal, is
yeah,
unity, right?
we have-
That all may be one.
We have plenty of contemporaries that already know what it is that we're espousing right now, but building those bridges is truly doing God's work in
Right.
charity. So, you know, we can touch on those who struggle with some of the things that are mentioned as of this century in the church. And, you know, I know that there are many who struggle with even the concept that we are all priest, prophet, and king.
Right.
Because they think that, you know, it gives the laity, it kind of like decentralizes things that that may have contributed to some of the challenges that we currently face. And if framed in the right way, there's merit to some of those arguments, but if framed in the wrong way,
Right.
you kind of, you miss the mark, as they say, chet in Hebrew versus the tav that you need to be going for. Because, I mean, again, I've referenced St. Francis of Assisi, for example. This was back in the 1200s. He was most likely a layman his entire life. And then, of course, in the East, you have St. Pachomius the Great, the first writer of any regula ever. Also a layman his entire life. St. Benedict of Nursia in the West, the founder of Western monasticism, wrote the first, I think the first ever regula in the West, if not the first major one that stuck. And also a layman his entire life.
Right. So you were to say that they're only calling, that they only receive 30-fold? I doubt it.
Well, it's not even a matter of doubt. It's absurd.
Yes.
So
Duxio ad absurdum.
So now I'll put a little flesh on the levels 5 through 9. But in the interest of time, like I said, there's so much more that can be said, and that if you'd like to engage us in the comments or in any live chats or anything, we will certainly get back to you happily on resources and or just answering these questions. You know, God permitting. If we are able to get more of an engagement and let people know when we're available, we'd be happy to do that in a format in the future. So,
Yes.
but for levels 5 through 9 now, which are accessible to everybody, and not only accessible, but expected of everybody. Matthew 5:48, be perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect. That word perfect, that qualifying term means morally perfect.
Right.
And to do that is to reach the 9th level of prayer in this life. That is the gospel teaching. This concept of 9th level that came about in the 1500s because of St. Teresa is only a new way of expressing an ancient truth. This is the gospel teaching. It's not optional.
Basically, you just mean get to the highest level of prayer possible, which is transforming union.
Absolutely, or prayer of the heart,
Right.
in the
noetic
noetic
prayer.
sense,
Yes.
not in the effective level 3 sense.
Correct. You don't want to confuse level 3 in the Teresian levels with the level 3 of the East. Because the
Correct.
level 3 of the East, again, as I mentioned, the ultimate union there is equating with level 9 in the West. So not to throw anyone off, but so make it easy on yourself. Just get to the highest level, which is transform union,
100%.
which is not fully on you. This is actually more on Christ, right? Where we can only reach to level 4 in the West.
Prayer of simplicity.
Prayer of simplicity, really by our own entering into prayer, climbing the ladder, right? Becoming genuine in our prayer life and serious. And then Christ will do the rest if, so he wills it when it's ready, if we're opened from 5 to 9, he will bring us to those levels. Right?
Absolutely. And we had an interesting exchange at the end of part 2 of our video where you said, well, it's the prayer, prayer of union, right? And I was like, absolutely not. Well, no, yes, it is union in the sense of level 7. Just to clarify that, something that I didn't touch on, levels 1 through 4 of prayer are the ones that are generally pertaining to the purgative way. Remember we mentioned the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way?
Mm-hmm.
Well, levels 5 through 8 generally pertain to the illuminative way. Because now we're talking about God coming into our soul and infusing His presence in us, His grace, in ways that can start to be even felt at a certain point.
Right.
And then, but really, when thinking of the three ways to the one way of perfection, the unitive way only pertains to level 9, which is the prayer of transforming union. That's where the maybe the confusion of semantics happened there, because yes, prayers levels 7 through 9 refer to some level of very deep union with God, right? But you see a progression there: union, conforming union, transforming union.
Right.
But it's only upon attaining level 9 that the unitive way has actually begun.
Which is basically like seeing God for who He is and entering into such a deep union with Him that you're basically in heaven but on earth.
Right. So to finally put the flesh on levels 5 through 9, what I'm going to do, as I said, I'm going to keep it brief. I'm going to mention the 5 senses, right? We have 5 exterior senses in our body, touch, taste, sight, hearing, smell, in no particular order. And then in the scholastic tradition, we say those all come together. There's a phantasm that's made in our imagination, but it really comes through our common sense power, which basically takes those 5 data points and then makes a unified data point by which we, generally a healthy person just experiences those 5 senses in tandem, right? And that's how we experience our reality around us. So too, with levels 5 through 9, there are spiritual senses. There's, some of this is analogical, but some of it is also actually, it's real. It's something that can be sensed. And for especially levels 5 and 6, you're starting to experience the mystical way, which again, Universal Call to Holiness squashes. I want to say it's Scaramelli, but I don't want to throw him under the bus if this is inaccurate. I think he kind of went big on the whole ascetic way and then mystical way.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, that's what happens when people try to categorize these really advanced subjects.
Right.
You start to go down these 2 different trains when it's like, it's really one train with different compartments.
Right, yes.
If you will. But once you've transcended level 4, you're going from an ascetic way to a mystical way, which is something we're all supposed to do. We're all supposed to be mystics. But it isn't really until you hit 7 and above that you're like, you're really, I mean, I don't know when you would call yourself a mystic. Mystics are
Maybe
so
you should
humble.
never call yourself.
Yeah, mystics are so humble, you're never going to hear it anyways.
Right.
But, well, maybe you shouldn't, yes. As a preliminary admonition in order to safeguard humility. But actually, we have plenty of instances of living saints, small t saints, right? The book of Ephesians, St. Paul refers to the saints of Ephesus.
Right.
Anyone who's in the state of sanctifying grace is a saint.
Yes.
Living.
Right.
And
a lowercase s.
And it's actually okay to refer to that.
Saint Kyle.
So too, is it okay? God grant,
I'm saying in the lowercase s. Hopefully, you're in the state of grace, so you'd be Saint Kyle.
And
but the capital S, just to make it clear, is when the church canonizes, determining that you are in fact in heaven. So that's the key difference, and that you lived heroic virtue in your life.
Sure. Well, the church only defines it for certain souls. There's many, countless more there that
Correct.
make the cut, but just you wouldn't have a public cultus to them. But regardless, I don't want to digress here.
Right.
Obviously, mystics made themselves available in some way, shape, or form in order for books to be promulgated, even while they were alive.
Right.
There's safeguards and there's certain rules depending on one's state in life. Even the sex of an individual had different bearings at different times in church history. If you read how St. Teresa of Avila's writings got out, that's its own fascinating story. There was a jealous princess that got a copy of something that was hers that was private. It was never meant to be made public. All of a sudden it became public, and St. Teresa had to harness that and the way she carried herself from thenceforward.
Wow.
It's wild. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But anyways, so that's why I'm saying it's humility is also groundedness in the truth, and we're all called to be mystics in this life. So let's think about the 5 senses. There's a hierarchy to them, from low to high. What would you think is the lowest one? I'm going to put you on the spot. Just think about it.
The senses?
Yeah.
The lowest sense?
Of out of the 5.
I would say... I would say it is smell.
You're correct.
Yeah. One for the East.
Yes. So it is smell. Why would you say that is?
Well, I was just thinking of if I had a choice to get rid of one of my senses, which one would it be? Smell would be the first one to go. I can live without smelling.
Sure.
I would rather see, I'd rather touch, I would rather hear, and
taste.
Which, it's weird because smell has to do with taste.
Sure.
But still.
So, and your instinct is on there. And this is actually really cool because we haven't previously discussed this. We don't like hash out everything we're going to do before we, record.
Try to let the Holy Spirit work.
100%. We need to let him
allow him to enter the scene.
And we get out of our own way, and we allow for the humility of our many mistakes as we refine each other and smooth out our
St. Paul
edges.
talks about fumbling his words yet preaching.
Sure. And even Moses had a speech impediment.
Correct. Yes.
So, your instinct is on. Smell is actually kind of the farthest of the 5 senses in terms of experiencing something internally, right? A smell can be your food that's close to you, right? Or food that you're trying to determine is this safe
This is
to
physiologically?
consume.
Yeah.
Is that and it relates spiritually as well. Is this safe to consume? Or it could be something very far away, right? Obviously, they purposely put that eggy smelling gasoline to warn you that it's there because it's very flammable. It could be dangerous.
Right.
And all those different things. So you get a sense of what's around you, but it's not deep within the heart, And so with mystical contemplation, what begins to happen, and with any of 5 through 9, what begins to happen is you are no longer active, God is active, and you become passive. So by becoming passive, God actually begins to suspend certain faculties within your body and infuses His grace into your soul in a particular way that helps you to sense spiritually His presence. And the smell of God, if you will, is the lowest of those 5. But and so much so that you might not even notice it. Right? Level 5 is so subtle that sometimes it would, St. Teresa says there's 3 distinct graces when she started to develop and understand prayer. One of them is to experience the thing at all. The second one is to even be able to understand it. And then the third one is to actually be able to put words to it. Any one of those 3 steps is extremely challenging. And, experiencing it, you could be just blessed with something, and that should be enough, right? I think of St. Teresa of Avila, the simple way, the little way. That's enough. There's very few souls that are called to really, to do, like, for example, what we're doing. Obviously, we've been called to be theologians. That's a vocation. People don't choose to become theologians. That's something that God picks a soul from his or her birth, and then they end up down that path. But to be able to understand it and then to put words on it, putting words on it, St. Teresa called wisdom, specifically. Having the words for it. So that's why this is very challenging to actually even go here in the first place. But you'll begin to experience God. And if you happen to get some amount of understanding or be blessed with a distinct grace of wisdom, you'll notice level 5 every time it happens. But probably not certainly right away.
Right.
Okay? So that's the smell. That's the 5th level, mystical contemplation. But what distinguishes it from the first 4 levels of prayer again, and then from the rest of the levels up as well, is the fact that it's God affecting something within you. You can't will it, ever. You've basically laid fertile soil with your first 4 levels, and which compound the purgative way, right? Because you're purging your intellect at level 2 with mental prayer, and then you're purging your will at level 3 with your will, and then with all of those insights that you can instantly glean, you've got your simple look and love at level 4, right? The more and more you do this, you'll be disposed to what starts with mystical contemplation. Then with level 6, you have the prayer of quiet. And with the prayer of quiet, it starts to get a little more intense, but still very subtle at this level. And one way that you can know there's a subtlety here with both of them, you'll notice that St. Teresa of Avila combines them together in her 4th mansion. If you remember, I mentioned mansions 1 through 3 pertain to levels 1 through 4. Mansion 2 has both mental prayer and effective prayer. But mansion 4 includes mystical contemplation and the prayer of quiet. And then you've got mansions 5, 6, and 7, which each get their own, distinguished level of prayer of union, because it's not so subtle anymore. But in level 6, with the prayer of quiet, you move from smell to, what would you say is the next one up in the hierarchy?
Taste.
I think it's touch.
I'd rather have my touch.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Than taste?
Yes.
I honestly don't remember which of the two it is.
But I'm sure most people would say they would want their taste more, but I'm different.
Really?
Yeah, and I have my reasons.
I've prayed about this, because touch is on the outside of you, but taste, once you're putting it inside you, that you're experiencing the touch of it, but you're also experiencing flavor and everything else. Is it higher?
I could see it. I can see your perspective for sure, and I think most
people... Well, I don't know which one is right, to be honest with you. You'd have to go back, do your own, homework. Years ago,
homework is to read the...
Father Albert Farges, 1925, at least is where I got the comparison of the 5 external senses to the 5 levels of prayer.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, just read St. Teresa of Avila's internal mansion, or...
Interior mansion.
Interior mansion.
Yeah, interior castle.
Same thing.
Yeah, so... I don't recall whether she actually does this, though.
No, I don't know if she does or not, but I do know that would still make people aware of, in depth, of what we're speaking of.
100%. So anyways, with the prayer of quiet, just to finish that one off quickly, since more of your faculties are beginning to be seized, God is taking over even more in your life. And you are the passive, willing participant. And so obviously it's still subtle, but it's more intense than mystical contemplation, because more faculties begin to be seized. And so you are. It's called prayer of quiet because your activity lessens while God's activity increases. So any of these higher levels can come in the form of some sort of a profound insight, which clearly did not come from you.
Right.
And the prayer of quiet gets its name because a soul sits still and just experiences that union with God, that communion, that growing communion. I'm avoiding the word union now because that's reserved for 7 through 9, right?
Right.
There's, in the West, Balaam accused Gregory of Palamas of quietism.
Right. I think it was unjust, but...
Sure, and I think that's probably true as well. I think it was a matter of semantics. But quietism is a distinct concept from the prayer of quiet. The prayer of quiet is efficacious. Quietism is a heretical practice of, navel gazing was the derogatory term that Palamas's practice was called, because they would, and of course this is through an Eastern perspective, they would sit still. They would purposely sit still. You think of even meditators and many other different faith traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever else. As you sit still and you quiet yourself, you dispose yourself to more insight, right? The difference here, of course, is that grace is involved, and with specifically these 5 top levels. But quietism is another subject for another time, and it's very distinct from the prayer of quiet. Quietism is something that someone basically tries to force in a way themselves.
It's
which
God
and
is
that's
the only one that can ensue.
right. If God's doing it, then that negates that even as a possibility.
Right.
So then you get with levels 7, 8, and 9. The prayer of union, the prayer of performing union, the prayer of mystical marriage. So level 7, of course, is an even deeper communion with our Lord. Whether that's from touch to taste or from taste to touch, we'll just let that be as it is now. But you are experiencing more of God. And at this point, he starts to seize your will. You can... whereas before it could be your imagination, it could be, it's kind of like slows way down, or things are placed in there that you didn't put there, that you didn't imagine yourself. Now we're getting to the point of your will being seized, in a sense, because you are basically the tenant, and the tenant is getting booted because God is moving into the house. Mm-hmm. It's pretty, it's intense. The intensity level goes way up with level 7 and higher. And obviously,
good analogy.
And there's a hierarchy to the soul body composite, right? Intellect is your king, will is your queen. You've got your memory, memoria. We know Saint Bonaventure actually was smart enough to glean that having 3 soul faculties is kind of a hint that the Trinity exists. Right. Even though you can't prove the Trinity through philosophy alone. Right. And
well, there's some debate on that, but
sure.
Yeah.
But
more agree that you can't.
Yeah, most would agree that. And then of course the body is subservient to the soul, or it ought to be, otherwise that's where you get disorder. That's why so many people today have mental illness, because they don't have that right order, that right relationship. And with the lower faculties, there's that hierarchy. Well, it's going higher and higher in the hierarchy as you go higher with the mystical levels. And so once a soul faculty is getting seized, now you're dealing with something that is high up in the hierarchy. So of course the subordinates are all going to be affected as well.
Right.
You see?
Yes.
And so that's why it gets more and more beautiful. The deeper that you dispose yourself to the capability of this.
I see.
And of course the capacity comes from God. And the receptivity comes from us. And so that's level 7. And level 8 is obviously the summit, if you will, of the illuminative way. Which, and I think I mentioned in previous videos, but if I haven't, just some like best practices for anybody that reaches this point. I did say you need specific guidance based on how it's happening with you. Because also God could end up, it's far less common, but God can place people at different levels at different times.
Sure, right.
Generally, it's a trajectory,
right.
But God's not in a box.
You're not gonna just reach that level necessarily, level 7, and then stay there. There's gonna be some fluctuation.
And the higher these levels go, there's usually like less amounts of time that you're in them. They're brief periods of time.
Right. But anyway,
the higher you go, anyways.
Continue, please.
Yes.
The ladder. Yeah.
But as soon as you reach the illuminative way, if you're starting to get mystical contemplation, you need a spiritual director immediately. Because you'll be going through what's called the dark night of the senses between levels 4 and 5 generally, and then with the higher levels between 7, 8, and 9. You go through what's called the dark night of the spirit. It's even more painful than the first one.
So that's gonna be 6, 7, 8, and then 9. You said 4 through 5 would be the senses.
Well, 6, when you're progressing from 6 to 9, the dark night of the spirit takes place. I believe it takes place during the higher levels, though.
Okay.
But in any event, these are just qualifiers for an experience that one size does not fit all.
Sure.
So
unique, yeah.
And that's why a spiritual director, a good one, will be able to adjust and cater to the individual things that are going on for a given soul and the blind spots that they're experiencing. which is part and parcel of the illuminative way, which is why you need a guide.
Right.
Because there's going to be a blindness. But from level 7 to level 8, now we're going to one of the most fascinating levels of prayer. It's the prayer of ecstatic union, also known as the prayer of conforming union. Your union with God is growing much greater, right? It's building upon what happens in level 7. The will is seized, and it has the beautiful name of the spiritual betrothal, because a betrothal is a promise that marriage is coming. And God is perfectly faithful.
Right.
But obviously, since the fall, mankind is not faithful.
I see.
And
so he could betroth, but you could back out.
Well, yes, absolutely. And man, and that would be incredibly tragic.
Oh, of course.
Because the closer, the more to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
And if you're reaching that close to a very powerful mystical union with God, and then fail, obviously the fall is much greater than for someone who remained ignorant.
You're higher up on the ladder.
Was never exposed to these things in the first place. So
Right.
for all of those listening in, sorry, you're in now. To the degree, of course, that it sinks in, and hopefully you're excited and invigorated to really want to go deeper with this stuff and take it seriously.
Right.
Because there's a great responsibility that comes with the tremendous joy and ultimately the invigoration that comes with charity, living a life of charity.
Right.
I mean, it's something that should be its own reward in terms of the sweetness and the excitement of the journey.
Right.
The hero's journey, as some say. So, with the ecstatic union, Lahodi specifically delineates 3 stages that can take place with level 8. You've got the conforming union, you've got rapture, and then you've got flight of the spirit, which are basically just 3 degrees of the one kind of level 8 of prayer. Theologians generally agree. You mentioned how St. Paul experienced, he was wrapped into the third heaven. Some years before he ever even
Was that
wrote.
John that wrote about that? Or that he knew someone? Or was it? Oh,
No.
I'm sorry, that was Paul himself.
Oh, that was
right?
St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12.
Right. I'm confusing the fact that some people think it's John, but it's actually
it's St. Paul, right? Yeah, and
he was being humble and speaking in the third person.
correct. Yeah, that happened to St. Paul circa 42 A.D. Around the time when he was called to Antioch by what was that? Bartholomew?
Or was it Barnabas?
Barnabas, excuse me. That's correct. And then some years later he ended up writing about it later.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get into the 3 degrees now, but you can look into Dom Lahodi, the
Yes.
Ways of Mental Prayer, if you'd like to get into that deeper.
Right.
And with the seizure of the will, especially if it reaches rapture or even flight of the spirit, that's why St. Paul said, whether I was in or out of the body, I don't know. It's such a visceral experience, and there can even be an experiencing of what's called the Lumen Gloriae by St. Thomas Aquinas, and or the light of glory, which is basically this medium light that God gives to make it so that we are capable of seeing His essence.
Sure.
And in this life and still live, which is really mystical stuff. So level 8, that's the substance of level 8 of prayer. There are some accidents. Farges gets into 6 specifically, kind of categories of which there's a few different things. You get what, of course, you hear of saints who can smell, like roses.
Right, yeah, I've heard of
Spiritual roses,
that.
even though there's no physical rose around.
Or people smell them around the person who's at that level.
Because it's
or has
called,
the accidents of the stigmata or something like that.
well, right, and that specific gift is called the odor of sanctity. Stigmata is another thing that can happen. That's fascinating. No one who's a true stigmatic has ever lacked in level 8 of prayer first.
Ooh, yes.
Level 8 of prayer always comes first before stigmatization. And of course, we're talking about less people than even receive commotio cordis, so
Right.
not even worth getting into, I suppose.
Right.
But and then after the betrothal takes place,
Right.
you have level 9, the mystical marriage. And St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross have two distinct beliefs about once one reaches level 9, essentially what essentially the substance of what happens is that the Trinity indwells in one's soul, and there's a spiritual vision of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit dwelling within someone's soul body composite, and that God is always with you, and upon reaching level 9, that never escapes you or never goes away for the rest of your life.
Right, it stays forever.
Right. The debate between Teresa and John is whether one can ever commit sin again.
Right.
Some say maybe venial sins, or at least being in the near occasion of sin. No, everyone agrees being in the near occasion of sin is
always going to be
inevitable,
right.
Especially if one is ministering to souls where
right.
people, you need people that understand this to be around people that don't, to elevate their spiritual growth.
Right.
And so, but whether or not one ever falls into mortal sin again or not is something that's debated. Obviously, St. Paul says we must run the race until the end.
Any idea who debates in favor and who against?
I haven't hit the books in a very long time. All of this is off memory. Yeah, so it's been. I want to say, John of the Cross is the one that says you can never commit mortal sin again.
Yeah, but
and St. Teresa of Avila says, well, be careful because
take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's
not
almost
de fide.
Yeah, it's almost like, it's almost like debating the finer points between free will and predestination.
Right. Yes.
At the end of the day, the point is that if you stick with uniformity with God's will,
correct,
you will ultimately be saved.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. Finish the race is the key.
Indeed. Yeah, and even upon achieving the 9th level of prayer, let alone the 8th or lower, God will still, sometimes God will throw even like the basest of the 7 deadly sins, which is lust, right? Because lust, if people are lusting, you're not even a man at that point, you're a beast.
Right.
Because until you achieve the virtue of chastity, you don't even begin to have prudence. And prudence is the prerequisite to any conversation you're ever going to hear here. So, lust, though, lusting temptations are things that can still be thrown at someone even in level 9.
Right.
Because God
and
will
the monks have that
test. Right. God will. We St. Padre Pio. I don't know what level of prayer he was at. He was at least at level 8. We know by the time he was 31 years old when he received the stigmata. But at what point he's received level 9? I haven't read a book on that, but we know that he's at least at level 8, if not 9, when the devil was appearing to him as naked women and whatnot. So but the point is that we are always being refined, because even once you achieve perfection in this life, let's say moral perfection by level 9,
right,
the hierarchical place that one attains in heaven is contingent on the amount of grace and faithful works and merit that one builds up in this life.
Profound.
Sure. So there's infinitude to perfection in some sense, which is obviously very mystical.
Correct.
So that's the conclusion of levels 1 through 9. Very, very much so a synopsis and just an introductory note on so many more things that could be said.
Correct. So, yeah, we just want to again thank you all for joining us here. You have any closing remarks?
Closing remarks. Well, we've touched on a number of concepts that, God willing, we'll have future episodes on. Right? We want to do one on what we what we hope for or envision out of this series. Maybe a little bit more about who we are. It was nice for this video to just get into what's going on in our lives currently, just enough so that people can get to know us and why even why bother to be on this journey with us and grow a relationship with us. So that would be really exciting to do. But one thing that would be really interesting is to maybe get into Donum Veritatis and what it is to truly be a theologian. Because
Pope Benedict XVI, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, Cardinal Ratzinger at the time.
Indeed.
Because was he the head of the CDF in 1990?
Yeah, Congregation Doctrine.
So that would be why. his name is attached to it. And but I want to leave all with this hopeful thought. It's not about how many books you've read. It's not about I mean, again, we've mentioned 1 Corinthians 13, right? You could have all the faith, all of the faith and all of the hope and all of the other, knowledge of virtues in the world, but without the charity, you're a clashing gong.
Correct.
And one thing that I always say when I'm ministering to people in the faith is always remember who Our Lady, generally visits. In all of the church-approved apparitions, the vast majority you'll see are all are humble, but unless there's a conversion happening, but they're mostly children. And the way into heaven is through the mind of a child, and children are not scholars. So that's my closing thought. My closing thought is that there's this really interesting conversation that we'll probably organically have over time that, in the East, I know especially, they favor that a theologian is actually just a saint.
Correct.
But there does need to be a true distinction made there, because obviously those who have put in the effort into scholarly pursuit have an excellence that those who have not do. But where the two of those come together is, whereas we said kind of like level 9 is heaven on earth, and then in other videos we tease level 10, which is heaven in heaven.
Right.
There's a, philosophy is the second highest degree in existence, and all lower disciplines ultimately roll up into it with what St. Thomas Aquinas calls being subalternated into them. Whereas theology blows the roof off of the ceiling and is the highest of the sciences. Well, there's this ephemeral region hovering above even there, between here and heaven, which is this realm called the scientia of the saints, or the science of the saints,
which is far above, right?
And it's actually the responsibility, the duty, right? Because we're going to talk about rights and responsibilities of theologians and the vocation of a theologian, what it means when God truly calls people apart for that specifically scholarly pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're, in your local regions throughout the world, and it's happening all around us, if you're going to sync up with souls that are at the higher levels of prayer, in the Western lens, let's say level 7 through 9,
mm-hmm.
Cling on to that lifeboat.
True.
We said we were going to throw a lifeboat. We'll have to get into desolations another time.
Right.
But they begin around level 5 for sure. And it happens in your mental prayer and everything, but on a different level with the dark night of the senses and what happens from then forward. But your other, food for thought is the saints, small s, book of Ephesians, saints that are living and breathing now around us. It is actually the responsibility, it's the duty of a scholarly theologian to study those saints, because it's the saints ultimately that have, in just a few moments of levels 7 through 9, St. Teresa of Avila talks about this in her 5th, 6th, and 7th mansions, especially in the 6th mansion.
Mm-hmm.
She says just a few seconds, let's say 30 seconds, if you have like a rapture, they might go for 30 seconds to a minute long. That alone will give you more than decades worth of scholarly study and scholarly research and scholarly work.
That's amazing. So that's a good way to wrap it up, and I think that I'll just wrap up by saying that, quoting St. Anthony, that you have the soul, right? Is a living. It's living just like your body, and that the fact that you're praying, prayer itself is the oxygen, right, to the soul, right, as oxygen is to the body, and you need that constantly. That's why 1 Thessalonians once again says to pray always without ceasing, because the devil's there lurking, trying to devour you. The more you're tapped into grace, tapped into God, you're protected, you're shielded with love, with charity, which is God himself, from hatred, pride, and all the 7 deadly sins at the end of the day. So you want to pray always, right? And again, as St. Anthony says, as oxygen is the body, So prayer is to the soul. And that is, I think, the essence of what we're trying to promote, is to pray always, and there's many forms and many ways and many modes, right? But to progress in that and be consistent even in times of desolation and times of hardship, which will inevitably come. So, yes.
Beautiful.
And now we can begin praying now, which is really the ending of our episode, but the beginning of our metanoia, right? Constant conversion.
Beautiful. Yep. In our next episode, we'll get into fundamental theology, because it'll be a great launching pad. Now you have the anatomy, the fundamentals of prayer. Fundamental theology, what we do in the next video is we get into 3 layers of it. There's what's called natural theology, which uses the wings of philosophy and history especially to prove that there is a God, that it's one God, utilizing mathematics and other sciences to prove these things. And then there's Christian, there's the Christian component, and then there's the Catholic component to natural theology. And then from there, other episodes continue to build off of those concepts. So we hope that you'll join us. Any episode can be self-containing, but you'll also get a whole lot by continuing. So we just ask you to, with a kiss of the foot, in all humility, we bow down to your very feet, and we would wash them, we would give the shirt off of our back to reach one soul with this message. So we hope that you love, keep, and deposit what it is that we've shared together today. So in prayer, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O Creator Lord, that in the Virgin's sacred womb thou wast conceived, and in our flesh didst thou mortality assume. O Mother of grace, O Mary blessed, to thee sweet fount of love we fly. Shield us through life and take us hence to thy dear bosom when we die. O Jesu, born of Virgin bright, immortal glory be to thee. Praise to the Father infinite, and Holy Ghost eternally. Amen. Amen.
Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Ama, atque semper Virgo, felix celi porta.